Hello humans, welcome back to another Fire Emblem Engage video. So today we have a guest on and we are going to talk about growths, I think.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about growths, that's for sure. I'm also a guest, so yeah, that checks out.
Yeah, I was going to say I want to introduce my guest Mekkah, and the last time I think he was on my channel was when we talked about growths for 3 houses. Is that right?
Possibly, I think so. It's been a while.
Yeah, so welcome Mekkah. Thank you for joining me. I don't think you need much introduction. I think most people know who you are, but if people don't, Mekkah is currently doing a Fire Emblem Engage Let's Play on his channel, daily uploads, the like. I think he's almost done, so yeah, check it out.
Yeah, uploads, I don't know when you're uploading this, but it should be somewhere between chapter 20 and chapter 25 right now, and then I'm going to stream the finale. So yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, this should be up a week from when we're recording, hopefully, based on my schedule.
Oh, you gotta hurry then, because I'm finishing it in a week probably.
All right. Well, I'll work on editing audio as quick as possible. Usually it takes a little bit, but we'll get it moving. Anyways, growths in Engage are way different to growths in 3 houses. I think our discussion back then was that growths were actually pretty important there. So I'm gonna just start it off with what's new in Engage. What's different to you? How do you feel about them?
I think growths are overall pretty important. I think back then, for 3 houses, I don't think we even had a 0% growth run when we were talking back then, and since then it's been changed a lot, so it's possible that everything I say in this video will be wrong as well. I think 0% growth is already being done in Engage, so I'm not going to say it's impossible. I do think it significantly changes how you play, as opposed to something like FE7, right? Where that's like the game where people, or like I would say, growth matter less, because you get so many good units with good bases that can just kind of steamroll the game. Like, it feels like every 2 chapters you get someone that just kills every enemy you find. And in this game, you still get replacement units, right? Like, that's something that people sometimes complain about. Even it's like, oh, you get Zelkov, he's much better than Yunaka, and then you get Kagetsu, he's just much better than insert other character here. So, like, those make it seem like growths don't matter. But then to keep up with the enemies, I think they still would like some good level ups along the way, because I think they do get creamed, they do get some procs along the way, and at some point the game just kind of stops giving you good units that can just steamroll everything. Like, you get some spoiler units near the end, and I don't know, I feel like you kind of want some leveled up units for most of it, at least if you don't plan your playthrough out properly. So it feels like growth matter quite a lot, but I'm sure that with proper planning and skill management, like inheriting speed from Lyn and stuff like that, you could probably still make some stuff work in Engage. But it's like, I guess the biggest difference from Engage with like 3 houses that I can think of at the top of my head right now is that the promotion bonuses work differently again. They work more like the old games, where you just get like a set stat bonus depending on what class you're going from and into. Whereas in 3 houses, you get that class elevation mechanic, right? Where if your stats are lower than your promoted version, then your stats get buffed up. So if you promote to Wyvern, you have like at least 17 defense or something like that. That stuff doesn't exist in Engage. So in that way, you're more reliant on growth. That's roughly the stuff that I've come up with for my homework for this podcast.
So I mean, I'm gonna actually segue off of your last point that you said, because that's also something that I wanted to talk about. Is like, even when you promote, you do get the flat stat bonuses, which is true. But then after that, if you second seal, which is something that we still have, you will change your basis quite a bit. I mean, one of the characters that I'm using on my current run is Fogado, for example. And Fogado you can instantly promote into the Cupido class, and I think he only gains 1 strength on promotion, but his speed is pretty high. And so what I did is I immediately reclassed him into Warrior, which in my opinion is probably one of the best classes in the entire game. And his strength went up from 13 to 19, and his speed only went down by 1. So it feels like even growths can be circumvented if you reclass properly into some of the more quote-unquote meta classes, I guess. And especially since skills aren't permanently inherited anymore when you master them at level 5 in a class, it feels like class growths themselves are a little bit less important than maybe the personal ones. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of what that you just described is Warrior being good or something related to class basis or growth. It's also probably partially just Fogado being really good, but being stuck in a class with kind of low stats. I have heard of Fogado Warrior before, and it's definitely something I want to try out because it seems really good. But yeah, you can, without the lack of skill inheritance from class to class is a very good point actually. In Three Houses, what you would do often is like shop for different skills in different class trees. People would get Death Blow from Brigands, maybe Darting Blow from Pegasus Knight, Strength +2 from, I think it was Fighter, and just kind of stack all those skills together. There's of course the famous Bernadetta build where you get like every single strength boost possible, and then you go to low HP and use Vengeance for 1,000,000 damage in one hit. This game, that's not really possible because you can't class hop and keep all the skills, and the personal skills are a lot worse than Vengeance or what's printed as Persecution Complex. Like there's almost no good skills in this game personally. And you only get 2 skill slots as well, so that really limits what you can do besides your stats. So I guess that's why they gave us like things like forging with more options to work with, and things like characters with better bases in general. Like Three Houses, every unit was like a growth unit, right? Whereas in this game, you get more units with higher bases. But the Fogado example is actually a very good one of like where you can change your class and get significantly better performance just because his original class makes him look like he's worse than he actually is. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, also, we were briefly jumping around and talking about, or you had brought it up, how the game sort of drops units at you. And it is very frustrating because it's like, I have this core of 10 units that I want to level up, but too bad the next map is forcing me 3, so I have to only bring 7. But then those 3 are really, really strong. You mentioned Zelkov. Same chapter, they toss you Kagetsu. And the way internal level works in this game with pre-promotes is a reason why I feel like a lot of the early units who could be, growth-based fall off quite a bit, is that any unit that's promoted or pre-promoted is counted as if they are internal level 15 when they promote, and then you add on whatever post-promotion level they have. I'm not sure if any of them are more than level 1. I think a few of them might be. But let's say Kagetsu, right? He has his base stats and he's a level 1 Swordmaster. He's counted as if he's promoted at level 15. But the way it works in Engage is that they are actually leveled up all the way to 20 and then promoted, but their internal level is stuck at 15. And so that's an even more interesting way that devalues sort of early game growth units. I don't know if you knew about that, but it does feel like a lot of the units they give you later on are so strong that they're only really growing half as much as the early game units. And so I feel like growths are a little bit less important if you're just going to sort of meta your way through the game by bringing in all these pre-promotes, which are very powerful, Bunei aside, really.
Yeah, Bunei is a special case. I haven't really looked at him very closely, but I do know his personals are a bit worse than expected. Kagetsu is like the most, he's almost like an outlier, right? Because he's so busted, but he's almost like unique in that regard. I can't really think of any unit like Kagetsu. Zelkov, I think, is the best example of a replacement unit because his strength is much higher than you would expect to have Yunaka at that point, even if you're using her religiously. But even Zelkov, I found late game doesn't really hold up very well if you just rely on, the good old fog machine strats with Gorn, right? Where you just throw fog, get the covert bonus, and dodge every enemy ever. I found that's generally not the best way to go about things, even in hard mode. So I'm not sure if he's like an example that just kind of makes everything trivial from there. But Kagetsu is definitely a good example of that. The thing you said about the internal level, I knew about the internal level part, and I think we've discussed before the part you said about how they've been leveled up to 20, but I'm still not quite sure how that works, and I haven't looked into it until I finished my first playthrough. But do you mean that they get like random level ups from their bases?
No, it's based off averages. So it averages, I think every unit you recruit is based off of their average stats from 1 to whatever level they are. So it's their average growths plus the growths from whatever class they're in, all the way to 20, and then it promotes them.
I see. That's interesting. But that's like an internal thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't know it unless you look into the game's code, right?
Yeah, so I think that people have done that, and I think that's been confirmed. And I haven't done the math on it personally, but I'm sure if we went and did the math, then it would probably average out. Kagetsu having 22 speed and 22 dex with like 17 strength is pretty nuts. Marin and Panette are also very, very good pre-promote recruits.
Oh, yeah.
So it feels
I haven't
like,
been able to... Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it feels like just between those 3 chapters, like one after the other, you're getting Ivy, Kagetsu, and Zelkov, and then you're getting Bunei, who isn't very good, but you're getting Fogado, who's a great instant promote, and you're also getting Pandrea, who's fantastic as a staff user. You can even just side grade him into Griffin. And then right after that, you're getting Marin and Panette, and that's like 6 units right off the bat that you could immediately replace most of your party with.
Yeah, I fielded both Marin and Panette for quite a while. I stopped fielding Panette at some points, because I was already tight on unit slots, right? And she was more of a filler that I'm just using whenever possible. Then like a core team member, but I did really enjoy using her. And I mean, she's definitely, I don't know if she's going to be better than Boucheron if you've been using her up to that point, but she's definitely very strong. She also died a lot because I would overextend her a little bit because I was like trying to use her massive offense, and then she ends up in enemy range and dies. Marin is another ridiculous unit that I didn't expect to be as good as she was. I think with Marin, it doesn't hurt that she's also a Wolf Knight, which is a new class, like a mounted knife user. We haven't really had any of those in Fire Emblem before, so that probably just appeals to people, period. And then, I don't know, maybe I've missed out on it, but there's no unit that I've had that I've thought about promoting into Wolf Knight at this point. So she's probably the only one you get anyway. So it doesn't really feel like Marin is replacing anyone. It's more like you just get this new unit type that also just has a really good first impression. That doesn't hurt here either. And then she's just like doubling everything and nearly two-shotting. And if you give her like a Forge or a Strength Tonic or some other kind of buff, then she's just one-running enemies at 1-2 range with decent bulk. Like, it's pretty hard to beat that. So I've been deploying Marin ever since, and yeah, she's really, really good. Really, really broken unit.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point about, just Marin in general as well. She comes, I think, with your first Silver Dagger, unless you've been like specifically forging your daggers up to reach Silver Dagger. Daggers are a really strong weapon in this game as well, because every forge gives them 2 might. And so that helps just Marin in general. She comes with 15 base strength. And I think a Silver Dagger with 1 forge has 14 might. And then every 2 from there, I think it goes up to like a max of 18 or 20. I can't really remember exactly what the max is on it. But forging in and of itself also feels, one, it's way better than 3 houses. I almost never used it in 3 houses. But here it feels like a way to sort of patch up, between forging and engraving. You can kind of you play around your unit's stats and, fix any deficiencies. Like, do you have a problem hitting units? Just give it a Lyn or an Erica engrave. Do you have a problem with critical? You give, again, Lyn, Erica, or Corrin, for example. Do you have a problem with strength on slower units? You give them Roy or Ike. Stuff like that. And that also feels like it makes, I keep trying to circulate back to growths, but I mean, Maddening, you play on fixed for the first time every time, but for most people, they're probably playing on hard or normal, and growths are random. And so if they get a bad growth on a unit, they're kind of like bummed out or whatever. And it's like, that's not the end of the world really here in this game, because 1, you can replace them, and 2, you can really just tinker around with the Forge or use tonics like you mentioned, and stuff like that.
Yeah, fixed growths are very interesting to factor in. We haven't seen those since Path of Radiance, I don't believe. There's some finicky things in the DS emblems, but generally we haven't really seen any kind of compensation for bad RNG or anything like that. I really wonder how fixed growths can impact like a planned run of this game, because before, what you would do if you're like trying to plan a playthrough of this game, like let's say an LTC or a speedrun or whatever, you would try to see what benchmarks you need to reach, and then you give that unit as many level ups as possible so that they can hopefully reach it, or you rig like your reset until you actually get those benchmarks done. That's the only ways you can guarantee that you're clearing the game in the way you want to. Like, I need to hit 23 speed to double this boss, or I need 30 strength to kill this boss with a hit and a crit. But now with fixed growths, you have a set number of levels that you can give to a unit, and they can suddenly just hit that threshold reliably as long as they get the experience that they require, which is an interesting change for sure. For most people, I do think random growths are probably more exciting. Like, they can bum you out if you get like screwed, but it can also like entertain you if you get blessed. Like, it's funny to have a blessed unit. I have a super strength screwed Alir that I've been like complaining about all game long, which has honestly been a source of entertainment for me. It's just funny to see him go up against an enemy. It's like, oh, this enemy has 10 HP left, he does 9 damage. Go figure, right? That's just Alir for you. So I think that's a funny change that they did. It's interesting if they forced it on your first playthrough on Manning only. That is a very interesting decision for sure. I can see why they did it, but it's also like, why only the first playthrough and why only on Manning? I don't really get why they did that.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird because you also have to clear it on fixed in order to unlock random growths, and it has to be cleared on Maddening. So I remember hearing it somewhere where it's like, oh, you just need to clear the game once and then you'll unlock, all the options however you want. And so I was like, okay, cool, I'll clear on hard and then I'll play random Maddening. And it's like, nope, you must do fixed Maddening first to be able to unlock random Maddening.
And honestly, I think some people might overvalue how bad of a deal it is to get screwed on a unit. Even if you don't have all those customization options like forging, I find that sometimes people talk about, oh man, let's example, Celine is getting speed screwed. She never doubles anything. I'm so unlucky. And then I look up their average and they're like 1.5 below average. I'm like, she probably wasn't hitting a whole lot of doubling thresholds anyway. Like, sometimes people use speed screwed to say different things. Like some people will use speed screwed to say my unit has low speed to the point where they don't double, and sometimes they mean I got RNG screwed because I was supposed to have more speed than I do, and sometimes they use them both at the same time, so that can make a bit confusing. But I think generally it's not as big of a deal because you have ways to compensate, like a speed tonic or some kind of, maybe you can reclass them into a different class, or you can use an engrave, or you can maybe go for one shots instead of speed, doubling thresholds. There's a lot of ways around getting RNG screwed, but sometimes in this game it could just mean this unit is better off being benched. Sometimes it just means replace him with another unit.
Yeah. I actually agree that like a tonic in general, you're rarely going to be so screwed that you're like 3 or 4 points below the average. It's possible. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but like every time I'm like, oh, this unit isn't leveling up strength. And like you said, I'd look it up and it's like, oh, I'm 1.5 points behind. Okay, I'll shut up. But, you know, the tonic does it. The activities, the food buffs that you get are also generally pretty good. Like, you can usually get +2 on, like, 3 or 4 stats if you optimize your cooking or whatever.
It's probably worth noting that you can't stack cooking and tonics, right? Like, they do the same thing, as far as I know?
Yeah. Yeah, they're both counted as activity, but I think activity later in the game goes up to +3, I believe.
Yeah, it might have to do with like how good your chef is at cooking the thing, and then how much they like it, and then I don't know how many extra ingredients you add. I haven't experimented a whole lot with it.
Yeah, I haven't either. I know there's like a guide somewhere, or like there's a breakdown of it on Serenus Forest, I think. So if anyone's interested, you can go look there. I forgot what I was gonna say. Oh, I'm actually gonna play devil's advocate for growths, because there was one thing that I was looking at, and in general, this is one thing that's like really weirded me out in a way with Engage, is personal skills are really not very good, except on like a handful of units. And class skills as well seem to be quite disappointing. And so when you have not that much contribution from the skill segment of the game, rings and skill inheritance are different because everyone gets access to those. But the characters kind of outside of their own base growths feel to be a relatively closer to like a clean slate in a Three Houses way than they were in like a traditional sort of Tellius manner where they had like, you know, specific skills that they came with. So do you think that growths maybe matter a little bit more in that regard?
In some regards they do, some regards they don't. Like we said earlier, there's less room for customization with skills. I think the elephant in the room here in Engage really is the emblem rings changing how a unit functions more than their own setup almost. Like, you can put Ike or Lynn on almost anyone and they'll at least be serviceable. You can put Roy on someone with like at least middling strength and good enough speed and they'll just massacre everything because, you know, if you double with like the +1,000,000 strength that Roy gives, the enemy's probably dead. Like, I had Marin close to 2-hit kill thresholds a lot when she had Lucina on her, and then I switched to Roy. I was like, oh, I'm just comfortably 2-running everything now. It's such a massive difference. So if anything, they probably made it this way to make you really consciously use the emblem rings a lot. That's my feeling I'm getting. And compared to the emblem rings, I think growths don't matter much. It probably goes like emblem rings matter more than, I guess, your bases, which matter more than your growths, and then somewhere in between there's probably skills. That's probably how I'd rank it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we can also put like the class spaces on there as well, like we did with the whole warrior
yeah, true.
Example.
True. Good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, the class skills, I'm sorry, just real quick. The class skills, I feel like they range from decent to kind of insignificance. I think before the recording we talked about the Halberdier skill being really good. I haven't been able to use that one. What classes do I use? I've occasionally found like uses for Hobble on the Wolf Knight for like very weird situations. Other than that, I've used the Warrior one a couple times. The Break one is pretty funny. But like Warriors do like, I think 50% extra damage against a broken enemy. I think that one it can be significant if you're like taking down a really huge HP boss, I suppose. Other than that, I use the Soul. So. Come again?
On Maddening, you can't break the bosses.
Oh, so. Good point. Yeah, I haven't played on Maddening. I've only been playing on hard, so good point to add that.
Exposed.
Definitely exposed. Definitely haven't been open about that at all. Shit. Soul is pretty good on Diamant when he gets it. Alchrist gets Luna. That's pretty good. That's kind of it for me as far as class skills go. I feel like the subclass skills, I guess, also probably worth mentioning, like the covert, getting double terrain bonus. That's another big deal for sure.
Yeah, or mystical, ignoring terrain as well for high hit rates on mages and stuff like that. Yeah, you're right. I mean, in a way, it feels like growths are definitely less important than 3 houses. They might be a little bit more important than they were in other games because of the way class growths work. I can't remember if class growths have been a thing. Were they a thing in like Awakening and Fates?
Fates for sure. Definitely they changed things there. I think Awakening too. The thing about class growth that you gotta remember, this is actually something I want to brought up, so I'm glad you said that. If you look at like growth rates for this game on like Seren's Force, for example, they'll just list their personal growths, and you have to add the class growth themselves. And if you just look at the personal growths, kind of looks like GBA level, like FE7, FE8, maybe a little bit better, but then you add the class growths on top of it, and the growths has become kind of ludicrous. And I looked at the class growth table for a moment, and they range from like 10 to 30%. 30% being like really high stats. I think, for example, general defense must be like 30, maybe even 40. And then generally speaking, it's like 10 or 20% per stat. So they don't make a massive contribution. It just adds up over time, because 10% in one stat, I've always been saying, is not a whole lot. If you level up 10 times, you can expect to get it once. That's a good way to remember it. But then you got to remember that it's like at least 10% in every single stat that you have. And units in this game level up like maybe 10 times before promotion. And then if you use a unit a lot, I find that in hard mode, they get to cap level. You loop them, and then they probably won't reach cap level again. So let's say they level up like 30, 40 times in the whole game. And then that's for every stat. So in the end, those class growths and your personal growths are going to be a pretty massive contributions to your overall stats. And in the beginning, it's going to be very little, right? Because you've barely had any level ups, and as you go along, it's going to be more and more. And the differences between your growths are going to stand out more and more. So a unit that has like roughly equivalent bases, in, for example, the strength and speed, they start at 5 each. As they grow more and more, you're going to see like a 10% difference in their growths stand out more and more. So someone like Etier, who has, I don't remember, have like particularly great bases, is going to have like really high strength and okay speed without any help. So in that way, growth do matter. It's just a question of, like I said, I don't think they matter more than, for example, the emblem rings you use and sometimes the skills you apply, etc., etc.
So I have to ask this question. Is it a certified pitfall in Engage or not?
That what is the pitfall?
Overemphasizing growths.
Overemphasizing growth, right. I'm glad you phrased it exactly correctly, because the pitfall is overemphasizing growth. It is not that growths do not matter, and it's not thinking that growths do matter. I'm glad you got it right.
Hey man, I watch the videos. I've been a fan for a while.
Yeah, thank you. I think overemphasizing everything, like if we're just going to take the phrase literally, is always going to be a pitfall, because that implies that it's like you're already putting more emphasis on it than it deserves. But you got to take it into account, probably. Like if you're not going to look at a growth at all, you're doing it wrong as well. And I wouldn't say that's a pitfall, that's just making a mistake. But it really depends on the context how you're using it, right? But in the end, you should probably at least take a look at a unit and their growth and see how they're going to do it. Like take it into account. But not much more than that, and there's probably other factors you should look at first, or at least as much. That's how I would put it personally.
All right, because I remember, again, I keep hopping back to 3 houses just because we had our discussion on this, but I think I was pretty shocked in 3 houses by how you were like, no, actually, growths are really, really important here. And I can't remember if you said overemphasizing them wasn't... I mean, overemphasizing everything, like you just said, is always a bad idea. But it was like 3 growths in 3 houses were really, really important to the point that, yeah, you should really focus on them because it's, important for min-maxing. Whereas here, it feels like we're saying, yeah, don't overemphasize them. They're not as big of a deal as you think they are.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what I said on 3 houses. I think it's very possible I was wrong back then, because I think we had that discussion somewhat early in 3 houses' lifeline. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was before people started planning 0% growth runs, and before I realized just how many things you could stack on a unit before even considering level ups. I remember seeing Rangor do math on, for example, Sedeth, finding like a boss with him, and the formula that he was like using to add up all the things Sedeth could do without strength level ups is massive. It was like, well, you take his base strength, then you add the Wyvern class base, and then you add the gardening stat boosters, you add death blow, you add strength +2, some flame as a adjutant for +3 attack, Some people standing next to him with personal skills. I don't remember exactly which ones are in 3 houses, but there's probably some rally strength from Annette's, stuff like that. And it added up to so much that you could like one round, one final boss through like their dragon armor or whatever. It was quite impressive. So in hindsight, growths probably don't matter as much as I said back then in 3 houses. But like I also said earlier, in 3 houses, units get a bunk ton of level ups throughout the game. And like most units you have, all the students, pilots, etc., they all start as like trainees. You gotta level them up. And the class bases I referred to, they help with like screwed units. But if that's all they're getting, they're probably not going to hit a whole lot of casual gameplay benchmarks. Like a unit that just has Wyvern bases is not going to perform very well in part 2. So in that sense, I do think growths matter. I think this just goes for the series in general. The more you plan out your playthrough, the more you look closely at benchmarks you need to hit and plan the game around that using your resources, the less you can the less you need growths, the more you can ignore growths almost, because you know what you're going to need and what you're going to do. This is why 0% growth runs are more planned out than casual playthroughs. That's why they both work. So in that way, you can make them matter less. And I think for me, the question is not anymore is like, can you play the game without growths, or do you have to worry about growths? But it's more like, how much does it hurt you if you don't get level ups? How much do you need to plan to compensate for it? That I think is the interesting question. In this game, I don't know, from what I can see, people are pretty chill ignoring growths if they just plan out the but they usually have to be like a bit of the game. Like they have to understand the game to a certain extent. But considering something like an engage attack, which usually just one rounds an enemy, if you plan it properly, that really helps with ignoring growths. I probably got a little bit off track here, but my point is, I can be wrong. And the point is, I think in both cases, both for 3 houses and engage, you can ignore growths if you are planning very, very carefully. That's what I think.
Right, and I actually completely agree with that. I am 100% sure we will see an eventual... I know someone on YouTube is doing reverse recruitment, so that's already been played with. And so I'm sure we will see 0% growths.
I think someone's doing it. I just don't remember who. I wish I looked it up beforehand, but I think it's already out there.
Well, if I find it, I'll put it in the description of this video so people can go and look at 0% growths and reverse recruitment and all those funky clears that people do, because I think they're great. One of my friends is doing an LTC. He's almost done. That has been very interesting to see, because it loops us back to the point where you are like stat thresholds, certain things you need to hit. Like Verve, who is doing the LTC, who's a good friend of mine, was literally talking for his chapter 22 clear, I think, how he needed exactly one more strength on his Kagetsu in order to get like a 1-round clear with a Rider's Bane on certain calves. And he was like, because my Kagetsu is 1 strength short, I had to go and get mentorship on my Alir and put him next to Kagetsu and give him the personal so that he can 1-round one of the Cavaliers and then get the EXP necessary to get that 1 strength. So it's like, yeah, that definitely all exists, and you can really see people planning it out, which is really, really interesting. But having said that, yeah, he's on fixed.
Yeah.
Having said that, I wanted to ask you, certain stats matter more than others, right? What's the best stat in Engage?
Damn, you just dropped that on me. I mean, intuitively, the first thing that comes to mind is Strength or Magic, whichever one you're using, because it doesn't matter if you double when you're using an Engage attack, and if you're... The most important kills are probably going to be irrespective of your speed. Like if you're using like engage attacks to kill bosses, then all you just need is power. Probably. I can still see an argument for speed. You need 5 more speed than the enemy to double, which is 1 more than we usually have. And doubling usually makes you do twice as much damage as usual. Avoiding attacks is not as reliable in this game as it is in previous games. It's like Fate's RNG, roughly speaking. I have a whole video about people that get the complain about why they're getting hit and engaged compared to 3 houses. And my comment section is full of people, oh, I get hit, I got RNG screwed, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the point is, avoid tanking is less reliable in this game unless you have really high avoid, like a Thief in the Fog. Because below 50%, what you see is what you get. So 20% displayed means it's 20% real hit. This is different from 3 houses. So speed, probably not as important when it comes to like defensive use, like dodging, unless you're a Thief in the Fog or in a forest. So my nod would be Strength or Magic. Magic has also been debuffed quite a bit in this game, though, I gotta say, because staff users no longer need it to function, because the amount of tiles that they can warp or rescue, stuff like that, has been set per staff instead of differing depending on your magic range, which is a great change, I think. So magic is a little bit worse in that regard. Strength is still really good. A lot of engage attacks hit off your strength, and they're very important to kill bosses with. So yeah, that's what I'd probably go with, is like strength or magic. What do you think?
I actually kind of disagree with you because of forging, because of engraving, and because of smash weapons. Whenever I engage, I always have smash weapons on whatever unit I'm engaging with, and that just increases their damage by like astronomically, to the point where like 4 or 5 points in strength would be nice. But if I've got a forged smash weapon specifically for my engage attacks, then the boss is gonna die. Like, they're not really gonna survive that. On archers, I agree with you. On mages, I actually think magic is pretty important, because mages are very, very strong in engage. Most enemies have low resistance, and there are very few high resistance enemies in the game. So I found actually magic is more useful the later into the game you get, until like the last couple chapters where for some reason resistance spikes and there's a lot of Griffin Knights. But my vote would have to be speed.
I see.
I think speed is still very, very good. I think the speed taker skill, which is 2000 SP in cost, is like one of easily the best value skills to inherit, just because once your unit gets rolling, that's 10 extra speed, you're doubling, you're dodging a little bit more. Again, to bring up maddening AI, if a unit has 0 hit on you in maddening, they're not going to attack you. So, thieves in that way just fall off a little bit late game if you're just putting them in terrain. But a unit with high enough speed, but not super high speed, is going to be avoiding a little bit more reliably. So yeah, I would agree with you, but I would lean more towards the speed category, because I find there's less ways to cheaply patch up speed than there are to patch up strength and magic, if that makes sense.
I can see that. I think this is really... You can debate about this and bring up different circumstances where different stats are better, but in the end, this is contextual. If you're facing an enemy that you're just short of doubling, then 1 more point of speed is obviously super valuable, because you're doing twice as much damage. That I can definitely agree with. But if you're fighting an enemy that you're not doubling, but you're 1 short of one-shotting, then that 1 point of strength is going to be much better. And I guess the only way to weigh which one is better would be to count all the occurrences where they can possibly happen, which is probably impossible. So, I mean, I can see it. I don't have experience on maddening. I think gauging how good a stat is on maddening is probably better technically, because the bar is higher, and so the more important stat is going to come up on top. This is just me coming up with an answer based on my hard mode experience, but I can definitely see speed being just as if not more important. I haven't actually tried the thing you said about smash weapons. I had one occurrence where I put an iron blade on someone with the idea that, hey, I can use an engage attacks to do more damage. But then that unit couldn't actually use swords. So it was a dumb mistake on my part. But the idea was in my head at one point. I just want that on the record.
Yeah, silver smash weapons do a ton of damage late game. Like, it's nuts. You want to fire off some really lethal great aethers? Have fun with that. Like, it's some of the most fun and satisfying parts of the game for me.
Mm-hmm. Definitely want to try it out.
But, it's a good point that you brought it up. Because I actually forgot this when I was, talking about it just now. But maddening, actually, I might have to change my opinion and agree with you on strength, because all enemies on maddening have higher speed thresholds and higher defense thresholds. So actually, maybe you need, in order to do a little bit more damage, you're going to need to rely on your strength and a little bit less on your speed, because you're going to need even more of it to double than might be feasibly possible to acquire. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, I'm definitely not going to sit there and do math on every single instance in the game where we would need speed versus strength. But I think it's a toss-up somewhere in between, in the middle, for sure. I don't think either of us is completely right, but I think we're pretty close to both being right.
Yeah, it's so contextual. Like, it differs from unit to unit, too. If you have a unit like Chloe, for example, who's reliably doubling, but almost never two-shotting enemies, then getting 1 point of strength on her is great, because that's 2 damage per point she gets, right? But for a unit that's more average on speed, that needs more speed to double, but is already pretty comfortably two-shotting, then a point of speed can be massive. So, I don't know, it's a fun discussion to have, but it's not really one that is meant to have a definitive outcome, probably, right?
No, it also completely depends on your playstyle, right? Like, if you're, again, and the classes you bring, if you're using a bunch of halberdiers that are guaranteed to double with their personal skill, then maybe you don't really need the speed. But someone who is sitting there with a bunch of sword masters who is relying on speed to double, is going to say speed is the more important stat. So
Yeah, but they're using Swordmaster, so they're probably wrong in the first place.
hey man, the 11 sword is really strong. You know, never rule out a Swordmaster with 11 sword if you've got high base magic.
Yeah, sure. I'm memeing, but yeah. I haven't heard great things about Swordmasters, let me put it that way.
Yeah, no, they just have really, really high speed. And their growths aren't terrible. Like, they give you an extra 10% in strength, so it's not like they're wet noodles.
I'm sold. 10% extra strength, sign me up.
10%, you know, it's that 1 point in 10. It matters. You just said the strength, the 1 point might matter, so.
10% over what, nothing?
Yeah, most units do have like 10% or more in strength in their class, so I feel like 10% is like the base for class growth.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Oswin because he has 5 more points of speed.
Yeah, man, Oswin, those 5 more points in speed, they mattered for me when I was 8 years old and playing FE7 or whatever it was. His speed growth mattered for me. I'm telling you right now, like.
Yeah, he has 4 more points of speed than Barth. Like, he's really good.
It matters. One last thing, since I asked you what the best stat was, that I have sort of listed here. It's more of like a little bit of an interesting fact that I've sort of kept track of. But you don't get your first speed wing in this game until around chapter 19, I think it was. But you do get a lot of energy drops much earlier in Spirit Dusts. And I don't know how much this factors into the growths conversation, but these permanent stat boosters are always like a very rare commodity. You only get 2 or 3 of them per run, per stat. And the fact that speed wings are locked to so late in the game, does that change your opinion a little bit on sort of not necessarily min-maxing, but paying attention to growths in general?
Yeah, it's more paying attention to how much speed / strength / anything a unit has overall. Partially their growth, but partially all the other things I mentioned. But it's funny you bring it up. It's the exact reverse in FE6, where you get 3 speed wings with no energy drops. I think the fact that you get so many energy drops in this game is one of the reasons why Chloe is considered pretty good, because you can +2 strength on Chloe means 4 more damage per double. It's pretty good. Whereas almost no way to fix speed until late game. And FE6 is like the reverse, where you have so many speed wings that Lilina, getting her caught up to speed thresholds is easier than getting Lu caught up to 2 kill thresholds because you get almost no energy rings. So I do think this changed the discussion, but not necessarily around growth, but more like what benchmarks a unit is likely to reach around a certain point and how much you can do as a player to fix it. But it definitely matters for sure. Personally, I threw all my speed wings on Ivy to get her to double to Nos tank. So, because you have Micaiah on there. That's one great way to just boost a unit straight out of, this is pretty okay, I guess, to, I could just put her in range of 5 Wyverns and they'll all be dead at the end of the turn. So, it definitely impacts unit discussion for sure.
I'm going to say one more thing, and I'm just going to say 2 words, and I'm going to let you answer. Dire Thunder.
That is a good thing. I mean, that pretty much implies you're resetting for the Olwen Ring, right? That's the only way you're going to get it. So, the Olwen Ring is weird because I feel like the game wasn't really designed with the idea that you just get a 1 to 3 range weapon that doubles like that. Like, they literally made Thunder weapons not double for that reason, because it's too good. But then they implemented a gacha mechanic where you can get it if you get really lucky. There was a time where I was trying to get it, and I was like, wait, this is taking forever. I'm not going to do it. This was before we figured out a better method to do it. I was just doing the reroll the whole thing until I get it, right? And then hopefully get it. But apparently you can advance it through combats and stuff. Or through deploying units in certain chapters. Anyway, there's millions of videos out there about how to do that. With the Olwen Ring, my mentality going into it was I don't need this to beat hard, and the game is designed with me needing it to get it, so I didn't get it. But it is obviously so good that it probably has a place in discussions around how good stats, units, etc. are in this game. And if we factor it in, well, that really nerfs how useful speed is for mages, doesn't it? Because they could just thunder fry someone on player phase and even enemy phase. No, not enemy phase. It
literally nerfs them.
Yeah.
Because you're also probably putting the Ike and Roy engraves, which give you 50 weight or whatever.
Yeah.
It is. It's closer to 30, so they have no speed pretty much.
Yeah, they're gonna freaking die if you're not careful with them. But you use them as a player phase nuke then, right? Just exclusively. You just kill everything.
Yeah.
You dance them, you dance the gods them, you kill 3 enemies. Nice work. Well played.
Pretty much.
Yeah, in those cases, magic is obviously everything.
Indeed. Just as the Fae developers wanted it to be.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't think I have any more points on my list to talk about. I think we've talked about the serious stuff and the little funny stuff and the interesting stuff. Anything else you want to say before we conclude?
I have one more tiny note, and it's that somewhat amazingly, caps actually sort of matter in this game, which kind of factor in why growth don't matter as much in other games sometimes.
Sure.
Specifically, the thing I had with Diamant is that his personal class is like a 22 dex cap, and so his hit is kind of soft capped as well. And every now and then I get frustrated when he misses like a hand axe or something, which is totally my fault for not putting him in hero. Like, let me just get that clear. Hero is like a 28 or 29 cap for some reason over, I think it's class called like Successor or something. That is pretty funny that they actually made caps matter. That's one of the ways that growth were slightly nerfed in older games, even though they don't need to be nerfed. But that's more of a side note than something that actually warrants discussion, right? I don't know if you know any other classes where the caps matter, but it's just something I noticed in my game.
I was complaining about this in my unique classes guide because all of the lords with their unique classes have trigger skills that are based off dex, and a lot of them have really low. Ivy is another one who has a really, really low dex cap, but Grasping Void procs off that. And so, like, it's very frustrating. Someone like a Hortensia, for example, has a reasonable dex cap at 36, I believe. So World Tree is actually not bad in terms of proc rate. And every one of those stat caps can be overcapped by a maximum of 20 when you're looking at the blue stats. The blue stats stack up to a maximum of 20. They don't go any higher than that. And you can reach it with most stats. So it's not completely make or break in that regard, but yeah, stat caps for dex for trigger skills are frustrating. Like, I was upset about it, and a lot of people in the comments were like, it's a bonus that you get for using the class. It's not that important. I was like, well, what else is unique about this class except the skill? Like, I would rather have them in another class.
I kind of get it. It probably did it intentionally because Soul and Luna are both really, really good skills to have. And if you proc Soul all the time, you just don't die ever.
But Alchrist gets like 41 dex.
I mean, I didn't use Alchrist clearly because I just said that, but fair enough. Fair enough.
He's great, especially if you put him with Lyn, because Luna can proc off every single hit of Astra Storm.
Yeah, I've heard of many an Armor Knight dying to Alchrist doing like no damage to them in the first place. It's quite funny.
Yep. Especially with crits. It's disgusting. Alchrist is great.
Yeah, Alchrist being better than Diamant is the funniest thing in Engage ever.
It's hilarious because of his inferiority complex and how much the conversation is centered around, like, oh, I'll never live up to my big brother.
Turns out he doesn't need to.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for that final point. That was very nice. I think we are reaching the end of our 45-minute long conversation. It'll probably be a little bit less than that once I've done all my little fancy audio cuts and optimizations, but for everyone who's made it this far in watching the video, thank you very much. And thank you, Mekkah, for joining me in this video and discussion. It was great.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. And everyone, I will leave a link to Mekkah's socials and channel and all that stuff in the description. So if by any chance somehow you don't know who this guy is yet, feel free to go to his channel and check him out. He's great.
All right, thanks.
All right, I'll catch you guys all in another video very soon. Peace.
Later.